Hey, Mickey.
Mickey!
Hey, Mickey. Hey, Mickey.
Oh, Mickey is so fun!
I really hate dying, but I was expendable.
Hey, Mickey!
Every time you die, humanity moves forward. Is Mickey special?
You wanna be You're so excited! Guys like you, Mickey!
He's alive. I'm fine. See you tomorrow.
Mickey 17, only in theaters March 7th. Tickets on sale now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kulturecast. I am still your host, Chris Stachiw, much to the chagrin of some, and I am joined by my two good friends all the way from somewhere out there in Radio Land, Korean K-pop historian Miranda, and also joining us all the way from, he's all the way out there in God's country, West Texas, y'all. Dr. David D. Perlmutter. The D is important. He's here too.
Thank you, Chris.
And I drug both of y'all kicking and screaming into this. Not kicking, not screaming, but I mean, I'm so excited to hear what Dr. Perlmutter has to say, just because he kind of buried the lead initially by saying, I have thoughts. But I'm actually really excited because, Miranda, the connection for you to this and us to this film ostensibly was you had the idea to do Train to Busan, which then led to me going, oh, I haven't seen Mickey 17, based on Mickey 7, which is a Bong Joon Ho film, and he's, I would say, for most Westerners, he's like, if you know a Korean director, he's probably the only one, I would assume, just based on the Parasite of it all. So this was kind of an idea of mine. So I apologize in advance if neither of y'all liked the film. However, on this episode of the Kulturecast, we are talking about Mickey 17, a film that came out last year, directed by Bong Joon Ho, and starring, one of my favorite actors, and I kid you not, I genuinely find Robert Pattinson to be one of the most intriguing actors, I think, who's working right now. Robert Pattinson plays himself, but he's kind of always doing a riff on his general being. He plays Mickey Barnes, an expendable, a man who goes to space and essentially dies every day or every couple days or whenever they need him to, because he is an expendable, which means they can just reprint him. So he goes and does dangerous jobs or becomes a lab rat. And the film explores it in a holistic way that I think is very interesting, because it's not at all what I was expecting, but in a lot of ways, that's a very good thing. But it is a sci-fi comedy ? I'm very curious where y'all come in with the thoughts on the film. But Miranda, I will kick it to you first. What did you think of Mickey 17? And also, because I assume we're close in age, thoughts on Robert Pattinson?
Well, you would think it, but I actually was not a huge Twilight fan when I was younger. So my first introduction to him, and this is probably true for most people, was Harry Potter.
I was going to say, I assumed
a dreamboat.
I agree. I thought it was going to be Harry Potter. I was not alluding to Twilight. I think
his most famous role is probably Edward in Twilight, I think.
Isn't that unfortunate?
But, he should be better known for his perfect performance as Cedric Diggory in the Harry Potter movies. And he has come a long way since then. He's famous now. He's famous enough now that he can take on really any project he wants through name alone. And he's one of those interesting characters that just seems to enjoy being in movies for the sake of being in movies. He doesn't seem to be a clout or fame chaser. He really enjoys what he does, and he's been involved in some really interesting stuff, including Mickey 17, which I had mixed feelings about. I obviously thought he was fantastic. He was so solid the whole time, especially with that sort of whiny. It wasn't irritating quite, but it was perfect for his character, who's extremely meek and just absolutely trampled over the entire movie by everybody, with the exception mostly of his girlfriend, Nasha, including, spoilers, Mickey 18, the second or 18th, I guess, version of him, who, by a mistake, a weird error in the system, which I found to be both funny because just like in the comedy part of the film, like, I don't know how to say this, but he, like, a bureaucracy error like that happening feels very realistic, even in a sci-fi advanced future like this, where we're going to other planets.
It's very
Brazil, I thought that was
Terry Gilliam kind of.
That was definitely a layered element, a very comedic element. But he's again great. Like when you have a character that's playing two different people technically, because their characterizations were very different. He was just absolutely melted into each role. You could tell he was this cocky, super erratic, chaotic person versus Mickey 17, who just, he always had like the hunched shoulders and the quavering voice and eyes that, like prey animal eyes that were always looking around nervously at the people around him. So yeah, he was just probably the highlight of the whole movie for me.
All right, Dr. Perlmutter.
Well, I sort of similar to the comments I made about The Witch, but maybe more intense.
Oh dear. If you want to know what he's talking about, go listen to that episode.
We watched Robert Edgar's The Witch, and I said, what I'm going to say now is that when the screen credits roll for Mickey 17, I believe almost everybody there deserves a standing ovation. I was looking at the film and I was going like, the set design is really good. I mean, the spaceship wasn't some really completely clever new design of a spaceship that I'd never seen before, but it looked like a lived-in spaceship. It looked like, okay, this is what they would but it probably should have been bigger if they were actually going to another planet and setting up a colony, but like it was well done. And the costumes were well done. The weather and the other planet, the creature effects. I mean, it's very, very hard after thousands of Star Trek episodes and thousands of movies to come up with like an original alien or an alien that actually feels alien in its culture and its sort of outlook. And I actually thought CGI, alien, whatever they did, looked good. And the psychology of the aliens looked good. A couple of small things, like as Miranda was pointing out, one of the conceits of the film is that they can 3D print a human, certain humans. There's a whole subplot about why only certain humans and not others. But when you physically see him being printed the first time out of this sort of CAT scan looking machine, I love the little touch they have that he doesn't just come out like a fresh sheet of paper from a laser printer. He comes out like from a dot matrix printer that I'm old enough to remember, where he comes out just a little bit and then he has to go back and they have to do a little bit more. I know that's actually like 3D printing today where they have to like go move it, but it was just a great little touch. And so everything worked for me except the plot. Going back to Robert Pattinson, Academy Award. I mean, I would have legitimately voted for him. He played two distinctive roles. He played the toughest assignment for an actor is to play for 90% of the movie a really irritating character that you sort of want to feel sorry for, you want to sympathize with and empathize with, but he's just so meek and passive and accepts his fate that you sort of like go, okay, I guess they're just going to kill him again. He pulls that off, and then he pulls off, by the way, very good special effects, pulling off his not evil twin, but his sort of decisive, like every quality we wish a hero had in the movie twin, who eventually gets revenge on the bad guy. So just everything was great, except I felt that this was trying to say something to me that I felt was so simplistic that maybe I missed the complicated, complex, nuanced message of this movie, because it felt like so much farce and satire. And Toni Collette is one of the great actresses of our lifetime. I am a huge fan of Toni Collette. Until this movie, I would have said there is no role Toni Collette cannot pull off with magnificence and glory. She was told to mug.
Yeah.
And she is spending almost the entire movie pretending to be a bad actress, mugging in a high school play. I have so many notes for the studio, but I will let you instruct me both. Thank you.
I think where I come at this movie, obviously, is, I mean, I'm not going to pretend like I don't like Robert Pattinson enough to see everything that he's in, because I don't like him that much. I like him a fair amount, but unless Dr. Perlmutter, you're like, I'd like to talk about The Odyssey, I will be skipping that film because it's just not something for me. And so Robert Pattinson is an actor I like a fair amount, but there are some things where I'm like, okay, I'm just not interested. This was not one of those things. This was something that I just kind of missed because the last 2 years of my life have been hectic, to say the least. And I haven't had time to just sit and watch movies, which has kind of changed in the last 6 to 7 months. So I'm able to just kind of sit and get back into the swing of podcasting and doing things. And I had seen the preview for this movie. I kind of didn't realize it was a comedy. I didn't know what it was just based on the poster, and I didn't watch the preview for it until a couple weeks ago. And that's when I was like, oh, we should, talk about this. So I didn't know really what to expect tone-wise with the movie going into it. But I think for me, and I am in more agreement with you on this film, Dr. Perlmutter, than I think we were in terms of The Witch, which is this movie, I think, creates a really interesting world, and it creates a lot of really fun concepts that could be moved further by someone else or even Bong Joon Ho with another film, because Mickey 17 is based on a book called Mickey 7, which already has a sequel book. And so the sequel book deals with what is it like now for the guy who could just die and come back to life to have to live knowing he can't just die again and come back to life, which is interesting. This movie never even touches that. Not to the extent that it should, not to the extent that, to your point, Dr. Perlmutter, it could actually give a film that's fun. It could actually give the film some substance, and it could give the film some punch and some weight. Miranda, when you were talking about kind of the bureaucratical farce of it all with, like in Brazil, we have the moth getting into the machine, and this we have, it's just a clerical error. If you're going to approach that and go down that route, you really need to lean further into it and don't just have it be the inciting incident, because there's so much to mine here that they kind of just allude to. And I honestly don't understand. And again, either one of you step in and tell me he is completely out of line here. The worst part of this movie is everything to do with the aliens on the planet. It's not remotely interesting. The concepts that they've introduced in terms of the cloning and the expendables and what does that mean, and then they have this whole cutaway kind of exposition pause where they're talking about how did they figure out and deal with the clones on Earth. It was because there was a guy who was murdering people and they couldn't figure out how he was doing it. It's because he had created a clone of himself and was alive, and so they have now rules and things against multiples. That to me was the more interesting idea in this movie, and I don't for the life of me understand why it was the more interesting part is the dialogue that they're having with the aliens on the planet. That for me was the hitting the nail way too hard on the head moment of the movie, where the Mark Ruffalo and the aliens of it all was just it's gonna date this movie. If this movie had come out 30 years ago, it'd probably be a different person or a different group of people being parodied or, farcically taken down. But now that we're living in this time and you can see when this movie came out, parts of this movie are going to date this movie unnecessarily, when the parts of this movie that were interesting could have literally had nothing to do with those characters, because those characters are tied up in that plot more or less entirely. Mark Ruffalo and Toni Collette are completely tied up in the alien subplot more or less the entire movie. And I found that to be, to your point, Dr. Perlmutter, kind of not great. And for me, Toni Collette as an actress is amazing. United States of Terror, Hereditary. I mean, and those are just two things that are rather well known. I could continue, but there's no point in continuing to list all the movies that she's done that are great, because it's pretty much all of them, to your point, Dr. Perlmutter. This is the first time I've seen her in something where I'm what a waste of what a waste of Mark Ruffalo and Toni Collette, frankly. They don't really give either one of them much to do other than be really sloppily done caricatures in a way that even an actor of Mark Ruffalo, who I love in one of my favorite movies, Zodiac, even someone like him and someone like Toni Collette can't elevate any of that. Now, all of that said, Robert Pattinson's amazing. To your point, Miranda, he disappears into both of those roles in a way that is not only impressive, but if you're an actor, you would want to watch this film if you're being asked to do something similar to understand how to really bring some nuance to a role like this, because he's playing this two different characters, but there's nothing that differentiates them visually until about the last third of the movie. And they get a lot of mileage out of that in some respect, but they really feel like two distinct, unique characters. And it's because they are such strong characterizations in both direction. Mickey 17 is so kind of, and the term I would use is squirrely. And Mickey 18 is really, like you said, Dr. Perlmutter, he's kind of everything you would want. He's very Machiavellian, is what it kind of strikes me as. He just, he understands what needs to happen and he's willing to do it because that's what needs to happen. And sometimes you need someone like that. And I mean, I think the movie gets there in the end. I'm just not sure that we needed like 2.5 hours to get to that point, because the movie's also a little long in the tooth for not really. It's like sitting down to play a board game that by the end of it, there's only like 2 scoring options as opposed to 4 or 5. It's like, I spent 2.5 hours on a game that's only got 2 scoring options. I really am disappointed by a movie that spends a lot of time to say nothing or think it says something. And this movie kind of, for me, at its worst, is one of those kinds of movies. But at its best, it's really an opportunity for Robert Pattinson to flex a muscle that acting is hard. Acting against yourself as another character feels like something that is a task only someone who's either insane or terribly self-confident in their ability as an actor would do. Because I can tell you all of the bad body swap or clone or acting opposite yourself movies that exist out there, and boy, the bad ones outnumber the good ones tenfold. So I think I come in kind of maybe at the point of, this movie's okay, but for me, Robert Pattinson, I think, almost gets lost in the equation by a movie that's kind of unnecessarily loud with a subplot that's not super interesting.
I want to go back to something you said at the beginning. I have a lot of thoughts about, and I mostly agree with everything that you just said, but the creatures being a kind of an unnecessary element when there was so much more that could have been worked with that was present in the story. I didn't think about this before, but they are, first of all, I hated that scene where they were talking with the creatures. I thought that was just so, I mean, even though it's the future and it's science or whatever, I just was like, I'm taken out of this sci-fi story because I don't believe they can just make something up that, like, you can communicate with this completely inhuman animal.
We just have a translator thing here. We just made it. It's an oxygen refrigerator. Yeah, I don't know. Like, we can breathe.
I wear glasses and I can do this because I've got a lab coat. So I hated that so much. I didn't necessarily mind like having the creatures, but there was something about it that bothered me. And then when you were mentioning that, I realized it was because they're kind of a repetitive. First of all, it's like a bunch of creatures and they all represent one character. And it's kind of a repetitive character because we already have a character who's vulnerable and needs protection, which is Mickey 17. Like, he's already this, like we talked about before, he's just so oppressed by everybody around him that we don't really need him to save something else. He needs to save himself from this system that's just using him without any respect for his autonomy or safety or comfort. And again, it's almost to this movie's detriment that it had Robert Pattinson in it at all, because he's, as you said, he's sort of wasted. I mean, you have somebody who's capable of pulling this off. And while he did a wonderful job, you can see maybe there was sort of some structure that was meant to be in the plot about how the Machiavellian Mickey was supposed to teach him to stand up for himself more and, teach him to take control of his life. Ultimately, the Mickey 17 that exists at the beginning of the movie is no different from the one at the end. He just has more friends and they change the laws. And he just has a really great girlfriend who's willing to defend him. But he hasn't grown as a character. He just doesn't have any arc. And they had a wonderful opportunity to do that with a version, literally himself, to show him it's entirely possible for you to be stronger, both for yourself and for the people around you. There could have been a moment where, like, he had to save Nasha's life or somebody else's, or maybe, the ship was in danger and he had to be the one to do something, and then it makes sense, everyone turns around their opinion of him. But having Machiavellian Mickey sacrifice himself in that way, having him get to be the one where he has this moment of success and really stealing what I think should have been like Mickey 17's moment of being a hero, which he never got. So and also his sacrifice was totally pointless. He could have just killed Mark Ruffalo. He didn't have to die. So I don't know why it was framed as if he was giving up his life when he was just doing the same thing that he'd done the whole film, which is be erratic.
Right.
So
they said they only needed to have one die, but we're just going to have 2 die just because cool. Well, and I think it's one of those, again, it's very problematic of a film that resorts to tired tropes. I'm in a position to sacrifice. It was like, Mark Ruffalo is not even a physical threat to Robert Pattinson. That's why they have that kind of climax of the movie end the way that it does, where he just blows himself up. Because if they get into a fist fight, it's like all those Steven Seagal movies that Dr. Perlmutter and I love so much that feature Steven Seagal punching the final villain in the throat and killing him in one hit. There's no fight there. There's no physical threat. There's no, I totally believe that this guy is a physical threat to Robert Pattinson. Not remotely. And it's weird because they really focus on leaning into the creepers and these creatures on the planet. And you kind of alluded to it a little bit, Miranda, and I'm sure that this is probably ultimately what they wanted, which is this one voice representing the many, returns to the idea of Mickey 17 kind of being I don't know what you would call it, but a kind of homunculus of every other existence and experience that he's ever had, which is an interesting idea. Because human beings, as if you're introspective about yourself and are self-aware, like we go through phases in our life and are different versions of ourselves, which doesn't literally, you don't literally die, but if you get better in life and are caring about yourself and taking care of yourself with your mental health, you can grow as a person and kill that version of yourself, as it were. And I think it's an interesting way of looking at it. I don't know if the movie's going for that or not. I'm not sure it even approaches that in any meaningful way, but you can tell that it wants to somewhat have that conversation, because at the end of the movie, we get a weird dream sequence cutaway with Toni Collette that, and I kid you not, when I went and read the Wikipedia synopsis just to refresh myself before we started the episode, it makes no sense even in the Wikipedia synopsis. It's just like, what the hell are we, what? Okay. When did this become a horror movie all of a sudden with the fake out ending? Like, it's so strange and unearned, but I think it's the movie kind of attempting to punch through that wall of like, we have something to say here. There's some meaning or point to all of this. And it doesn't get there. And because it doesn't get there, it really stumbles in a way that I wasn't expecting from a Bong Joon Ho film. That's for sure.
I think you've both made a case that there are, by my count anyway, 6 or 7 interesting movies that have been like a weirdly shaped odd train, linked together. And any one of them might have been something that made narrative sense. And let's just take this one point about bodies, right? So I have seen in the past, the least favorite episode of the original Star Trek was when Captain Kirk goes through the transporter, and that it's been replicated, I think, on every Star Trek series since then. And he split into 2 halves. One nature and one another. And there have been versions of this in a lot of science fiction before and after Star Trek. There was a really interesting episode. I think it was the new Twilight Zone with Bruce Willis called Shatter Day, not Saturday, but Shatter Day, based on a Stephen King short story. Where
you are correct. I covered that many years ago on an episode of a show that I did.
Okay, great.
Shocking.
Yeah, so
I would not have any reference for that otherwise.
Somebody splits into their themselves, but their character splits in 2, and one has more tendencies of one thing or another. And so there was a really interesting thing here, is because we're given a couple of rules about the consciousness of these Mickeys. Like, okay, they have all these wires, which really looks silly that in the future they can upload brains, but like they don't have Wi-Fi, But anyway, they update people's memories. But I guess it's sort of random. For 16, 17 Mickeys, he basically has the exact same temperament and character and like outlook on everything. And then suddenly on 18, he splits off into like every deterministic, strong-willed, refusing to take any terrible thing, all the terrible things. It just, rebellious streak suddenly appears in 18, and that's never explained. And it's okay not to explain it, but it just again this whole movie felt like it wasn't a movie as much as those marionettes on strings where people were just wiggled over to one spot, did something, and wiggled over to another spot. And that was another part of it. But then you said something else, Chris, picking up also on Miranda, is that, so with that, we could have had this really interesting movie about, different versions of yourself, and how do you resolve that? And do you come to some sort of consolation? Because we all have different natures, within ourselves. Alexander Solzhenitsyn once said, if we could just only have evil people and then we would know who the evil people are, but there's evil and good in everyone, which, I mean, yeah, I think in some people there's 99.9% evil, but it's essentially true. And as you're alluding to, Chris, entire religions are based on the idea of recycle, like you're reborn and you get another chance to get it better, right? To be a better person in the rebirth and the reborn. I think that's an element without the reincarnation part of a lot of religions is, you're supposed to go through life and get better, not get worse. So there's this really interesting world there. And then these other plots, I mean, let's just face it, the entire plot with Mark Ruffalo and Toni Collette didn't need to be in the movie. It was another movie, a farce, a satire. I guess they thought they were being super clever and making some, devastatingly interesting point. The aliens, although I liked them as aliens, didn't need to be in this film, as Miranda was saying. It's just irrelevant to the plot. It just felt like, oh, man, it's 45 minutes in and we've been repeating ourselves. Need a new subplot to be introduced. Some of the minor characters as well. Some of the women on the spaceship, like they're introduced, they say something, and then like a Steven Seagal movie, you never hear from them ever again, except, in the coda or something like that. It really felt so splintered without a unified vision, which you'd think you'd have with an Academy Award-winning director getting to write his own film, that you would have that unity of purpose.
Which is surprising because for the most part with the Bong Joon Ho films I've seen, they do feel that way. Even something, and I mentioned it when we talked on the last episode the three of us did together on The Host, he directed that. That movie is wildly interesting as a kaiju movie, essentially. But yet it goes interesting places, does interesting things, and again, written and directed. I mean, he's not the only writing credit on it, but he's one of three. Snowpiercer, I would say, similarly is an interesting movie. Obviously, Parasite speaks for itself. And I would say if you've seen Okja, it's interesting enough. I think Okja is somehow more of an interesting movie than this one is in terms of just, not that it's a bad or good movie, but it just kind of, sometimes you can go far afield with things and bring it all back at the end. You can. Authors do it all the time because the written word is seemingly easier to do that in a way. And the people that are really good at it, I guess when you're writing, you're given a lot more space and you can just create as much as you want because writing costs effectively nothing. Creating a film costs a lot of money. And so this movie is long enough where, to your point, Dr. Perlmutter, they could have done anything. And they clearly kind of did. It's almost like they did too much and didn't focus enough on just, here are the three ideas. Let's kind of figure out how we can connect them in the center somehow and bring them together as seemingly three disparate ideas that are unified at the end. Let's see if we can do that. Not, let's cast a net as wide as we can over like 10 different things. And there's Steve Yeun. Like, why is Steve Yeun in this movie? Jesus. I couldn't tell you. Like, there's so much about this movie that when you take a step back from, other than the fact that it has a lot of really good actors in it, they're just not given much to do. Naomi Ackie, who I love as well in everything I've seen her in, she's actually, for as bad as that last Star Wars movie is that she's in, she's not bad in it. I just, again, they don't even give her anything to do. She's just kind of bailing out Mickey at every chance. And it's so odd to me because, again, this is essentially a character piece. At least it's supposed to be. When you have an actor playing two roles, I don't know what the expectation is going to be otherwise. They have Robert Pattinson showing up, but I don't think the script shows up for him. And it's such a bummer because I don't know the next time you're going to get Robert Pattinson and Toni Collette and Mark Ruffalo on the screen together. And the fact that we have this scene with them towards the end of the movie that, again, it's interesting, but everybody is just, they're all coming into it from a different movie, tonally. And especially Mark Ruffalo and Toni Collette, when they're in scenes with Mark Ruffalo or with Robert Pattinson, it's jarring in a way that I feel like Bong Joon Ho is like, see, like I'm keeping the audience on their toes. And I'm just like, to what end are you doing that? And is it successful? For me, it's not successful. Going and looking at the reviews of the film and the kind of critical feedback, the film was rather well received, but there were people that felt similarly to myself that the movie's just kind of all over the place. Because it is. And I also, again, don't really vibe with Mark Ruffalo's character because, and you mentioned it, Dr. Perlmutter, with Twilight Zone, and I'm going to talk about the most recent iteration of the Twilight Zone. Most recent iteration of the Twilight Zone had, and I kid you not, an episode where a child, Jacob Tremblay, it would have been like maybe mid-teens, is elected president of the United States. Get it? Get it, everybody? Like, oh my God. Like I, as someone who grew up on Star Trek and Twilight Zone, the original series of Star Trek and the original Twilight Zone, and then the 2000 Twilight Zone, those sci-fi kind of, I would say, franchises or intellectual properties are so important even now because Rod Serling and Gene Roddenberry knew how to craft for the most part. I'm not going to say Rod Serling always knew what he was doing any more than Roddenberry did, but they understood the idea of human nature being timeless, and that will carry through a story all the way to the end because human beings are never going to change. Human beings are always going to be greedy and spiteful and mean. But like you said, Dr. Perlmutter, also kind and gracious and amazing and empathetic. And so that dichotomy, the back and forth, is important to have in any good drama, black comedy. In this film's probably self-professed case. I just don't think that this film hits the highs that it thinks it's hitting, but it definitely hits the lows that it's trying to avoid.
I would definitely say that Bong Joon Ho has a track record of this. Snowpiercer, I mean, you can kind of see elements of this in like previous movies. Snowpiercer, which was a decent film, definitely better than Mickey 17, but still similarly too much analogy and not enough plot, too much open-endedness and not enough groundedness. Parasite is obviously the perfect balance of the two, and where it's subtle and where it has both like physical and verbal and sort of cues that you can pick up on both in your first watch, and then there are things that you can notice rewatching the film over and over. There's nothing that you could take away from Mickey 17 that you didn't see the first time, except perhaps more just exhausted at having to watch Mark Ruffalo's performance again. And he did a wonderful job, but it was very exhausting. So there was absolutely no, it felt like there was no restraint from Bong Joon Ho, which he has had in past, like Mother, which I actually didn't know when I watched it that he directed it. It's a beautifully quiet film, and it proves that he's fully capable of good twists, which I'm not going to spoil it because that's not the movie that we're talking about. But it's very funny to me with the history that he has of both probably indications of his not so great. Some of his instincts are obviously very excellent, as proven by some of the past decisions that he's made. But I feel none of the ones that made one. Oh my God! Let me start over. I'm so sorry.
Go for it. No. Do not apologize. Don't apologize. Nothing to apologize.
Bong Joon Ho obviously has wonderful instincts for creating subtle allusions to class distinctions or whatever else he's criticizing in the film. It's, from what I've seen, he's very critical of wealth disparity, and that's element in this movie as well. But I feel for some reason that he was uninhibited in this film, possibly because of his past success, and none of the subtlety that made his other movies like Mother or Snowpiercer or Parasite so excellent and well balanced with all of the metaphorical stuff made it into this movie. And that's mostly why it's such a difficult watch for 2 whole hours of this just constant barrage of him smacking you in the face.
It is 2.5 hours of a bit much.
Yeah, let me pick up on something, Chris, just on Miranda's point there about subtlety. And I'm a big fan of that. If you have a message, an old studio mogul made a famous comment, like, if you want a message, call Western Union. I think I need to explain that to people who are half my age, that Western Union was a company that sent something called a telegram, which was a way of sending messages on a piece of paper that a guy with a bicycle would come to your house because you got a telegram saying, you have been drafted into the U.S. Army. But if you're going to have a message in a movie, that's fine. Casablanca, one of the great films ever made, has a strong message about America, especially 1942, facing a global crisis and coming together to fight evil. It had a message, but it told that message in a clever way with a beautiful plot that carried you along. Here, I felt really like I was paying more attention than the filmmakers. And let me just give you one example. Okay, so for a good deal of the film, and I didn't clock it, but let's just say for me, for about half of the film, everybody on the entire space expedition there, the colonial expedition, everybody with a few exceptions, I guess, Nasha and a couple of the other women characters, were despicable. There was a young woman lab tech, who was sort of feeling guilty about treating Mickey so badly, and she tried to help a couple of times. But basically, out of a couple hundred people there, including Stephen Yeun, his friend there, treat Mickey horribly. They torture him. These are worse than these are the Nazi doctors. These are the Japanese Unit 781, that performed medical experiments on Chinese prisoners and civilians. I mean, it's just these are the worst humans in the history of the world equivalent for the first half of the movie. And nobody is stopping this. Nobody is saying, Mickey is a human. Maybe we shouldn't be torturing him like that. And then the movie ends with like a happy ending out of some like 1970s rom-com or something like that, where almost everybody lives, including the faction that was supporting the allegedly, horrible leader, is still there, and they're still voting in the parliament, at the end there, right? So like, it would be like a movie like, okay, we have a spaceship, and 90% of the people in the spaceship are 1943 Nazis. But then when they get to the other planet, everything sort of works out, and let's all live together and forget about the past and move on. And I'm going, wait a minute. You forgot. It's like somebody forgot to remind them the characterization that they had established. And on the new planet, I guess, they're just going to have, the Fourth Reich or something like that. Whatever. It just showed, and Miranda's word was correct. And you said the same thing, Chris, is like a lack of restraint, a lack of any sense of like, does this make sense? Should this be in the movie? Were there producers who wrote notes and memos? I don't know. I just felt that I was watching 7 or 8 movies and they just said, okay, we'll keep it all, no editing.
You mentioned 70s films, and I think it's very funny, Dr. Perlmutter. Do you remember many moons ago, one might even say in a previous lifetime, one of the films that you and I talked about very early on was Soylent Green?
Yes.
This movie wishes it was Soylent Green. It wishes it had something to say the way Soylent Green did about disposable humans and what does that mean in a sci-fi world? And that movie, for so many people, is only remembered for the twist at the end. But there's so much that movie has to say. So much, even now, about class disparity, about income inequality, and the way human beings will turn on one another when push comes to shove. This movie, again, wishes it had the nuance that something like a Soylent Green did. And it's such a bummer for me because, again, Miranda, you mentioned a lot of Bong Joon Ho films that are very good, that he worked on and directed or wrote and directed. For the most part, up until Parasite and Mickey 17, he had released a film every couple years. He waited 6 years between Parasite and Mickey 17. And I know that there was a pandemic in there, but boy, what a lackluster next entry as a director after you win the Academy Award to have this be the movie that you release. Comparatively to Parasite, obviously this movie is no Parasite, but even comparatively to something that I think this movie would like to be compared to, like a Soylent Green, this movie's not even in that same conversation. I would say if you want to watch a movie that features action, sort of, more action than this, with an actor who keeps dying and keeps getting brought back to life, maybe the mechanism through which that happens is not the same. But Edge of Tomorrow is a pretty good movie featuring Tom Cruise where he dies and comes back to life a whole bunch of times. And that movie's amazing. And it lives up to what this movie in some ways kind of hopes to be, which is having something to say about the human condition when the human condition looks nothing like what someone like any one of us would recognize, but something so drastically different that you have to come to terms with it while it's happening to you. And that's a lot of what this movie kind of should have leaned into is, like you both alluded to, what does this actually mean for someone that this is happening to? And I like that there's VO in this movie. I like that we get voiceover throughout. I think that saves some of the movies kind of falling even flatter for me, because we do get to see inside the mind of Mickey 17. But frankly, they don't do enough with it. Again, there's, if you want to talk about movies with cloning or disposable humans, I would say look no further than 2009's Moon, which features Sam Rockwell on a space station as a lonely worker who doesn't understand what's going on with him, and he may be a clone or a disposable human. Those movies, both of those movies, Edge of Tomorrow and Moon, are much better, more interesting movies, and essentially have the same conversation that this movie's attempting to have, but it almost feels, I wouldn't say ADHD, but as someone who has adult ADHD, I think there's no better explanation than just it can't decide on what to focus on. And so instead of focusing on one or two things, it splits its focus among 5 things. And in doing that, it doesn't do any of them very well. And look, Robert Pattinson's not going to be this, I don't know, profitable. He has been profitable for a very long time. So it might be bad to say like he won't be this profitable forever. But I would love to have seen a better movie with Robert Pattinson in it, because he's not going to get his prime years every director he's working with. And I don't know if he's ever going to work with Bong Joon Ho again, but this is neither one of their best efforts. Even if it's a pretty good effort from Robert Pattinson overall, I still don't think that this is one where I'd be like, you want to hear what I think Robert Pattinson's best role is? I don't think this would be even in the top 5 for me for Robert Pattinson's roles. And I think it's trying to kind of be angled as something worth, like you said, Dr. Perlmutter, really looking at more critically. And I think it's a good performance. I just don't think it's one of his best performances, because a lot of his best performances actually have something to say at the end of it. Like he actually gets somewhere. Like you said, Miranda, his character has an arc. And in this movie, his character has no arc. And if you're going to make me sit for 2.5 hours in your movie, please give the character some growth by the end of it. Unless that's the point. But even if they were attempting for that to be the point, they didn't earn it in this movie at all.
One of the things that they muddled was, couldn't really tell if they were criticizing cruelty towards humans and dismissiveness of human life for advancement, or cruelty towards animals. And I think there's evidence for both, but you should really just pick one. In the scene where they're in prison, they look as if they're supposed to be modeled after kennels. They look as if they're in dog cages, and they're really cramped. And it's such a small area that just really struck me when I saw that. And then Toni Collette's treatment of the little alien baby for her sauces, that was just so callous. But callous in kind of again, in over-the-top way. You talked about her mugging Dr. Perlmutter, and she was, especially in those latter scenes, really overemphasizing how little she cared about anything other than her sauces and her husband's political career. I also want to note that the characters themselves, as you said, Dr. Perlmutter, they're not really consistent. I think Mark Ruffalo and Toni Collette are the best examples of that, because in the beginning it seems as if she has the reins. She's sort of guiding him in a certain direction, and he's just kind of an accomplice. But then at the end, he becomes this bombastically evil. He's basically a supervillain because he wants to wipe out an entire species, and she doesn't really have any part in it. She's just sitting back at the space station. So I'm curious why they had her be so seeming manipulative and in the beginning, and telling him what to say and prompting him to act in a certain way, if that was not going to matter at the end. I sort of thought they were going to reveal she's the true villain all along, which wouldn't have been super novel, but would have been more interesting than what we ended up with. It would have been at least some semblance of some kind of fun twist.
It's shockingly straightforward, I would say, is the other thing. Like to your point just now, Miranda, like the film that we're talking about, there are no twists. There's not any grand revelation. Like I was expecting there to be some sort of revelation about what the creepers were in relation to everything that's going on. And there's something else more going on here. It's like, no, it's not even explained. It's just like in a kind of laugh out loud moment where they're like, and it turns out the aliens can bluff too. And it's like, okay, like who cares? Good Lord. Like, it's not interesting. And again, to have aliens that are just kind of, I can't tell if they're standing in for something or if they're just, again, this was in the book, so we have to put it in the movie and make room for it. Which, look, you mentioned Stephen King, Dr. Perlmutter. Stephen King, one of his most famous adaptations, is nothing like the book. The Shining is nothing like the book. You don't have to make a movie and hew directly to the book. One of my favorite movies, Annihilation, is nothing like the book whatsoever. The book's amazing. The film's amazing. They can both exist simultaneously. It's not a mutually exclusive equation here that I can't like the book Jurassic Park and the movie at the same time. Like they're both good for a different reason. This, I just can't imagine other than it being like, well, this was in the book and we have to put what's in the book in the movie. No, you don't. Like you can just go in a different direction completely and take Robert Pattinson's character and go down an interesting lane of a certain kind of conversation you want to have about cloning or human decency or what autonomy does someone have who's looked at as lesser than a human, even though they are a human only because of the splitting of the consciousness. Like you could have gone down any of these roads. God, Minority Report does more of this. And that movie's not even about cloning. That movie's not even about disposable humans, but it gets to the idea of like, what is our, as humans, kind of responsibility to take care of one another in the kind of grand scheme of things, and using a sci-fi kind of trope to answer that question. Everything that they introduced is so much more interesting than the path that they decided to go down. It's almost like you're sitting at a D&D table with a very unprepared DM who's like, I've just had like 10 ideas and no unified one, so I'm just going to throw it all on the table. And if you guys fumble your way through it, it'll be fine. It's like, no, I mean, yeah, I guess. And someone will probably be having a good time. But I don't represent the people that had a good time with this because at the end of the day, like you said, Miranda, Bong Joon Ho is such a better director than this. And he's such a better writer than this. And if you're going to adapt somebody's stuff, go wild. You have free reign unless they somehow have creative control, which for the most part, when a writer sells their script or their book to Hollywood, they often don't get to also adapt it. They're often just cast to the wayside and someone else comes in to do it unless they can prove that they can do it. And there are plenty of writers that can, but there are also plenty of things that are just adapted by the people directing them or by the person directing them and the person who wrote it in something like Goodfellas' case. So again, there's no need to like hew close to the source material because I don't even think anyone was like, well, I'm going to see Mickey 17 because I love Mickey 7. It's my favorite book. Like, I don't. No, I know what people were there for, and it was for Robert Pattinson. It's a Bong Joon Ho film. So make that movie. Don't adapt the book. Make a Bong Joon Ho sci-fi film with Robert Pattinson in it and have the cloning be the inciting incident and then take it in some interesting direction. Don't make a movie based on a book that clearly the ideas that they introduced in the book are maybe they work better on the page. Maybe this is like a No Country for Old Men situation where the ending of that book works so much better in the book than it ever did in the movie. But I can't imagine that that's the case. But it's just one of these things where I struggle with the mainstream critical response to this movie being so overwhelming because rarely am I directly at odds with mainstream critics. But this is one of those things where I'm like, I looked at the reviews and was like, people praised Mark Ruffalo's performance. I'm like, okay, all right, well, I'm out of here.
No, first of all, I think we are on the right side of history here. I mean, the film flopped. I mean, the film made about its budget, which, you know, in Hollywood, you have to make like 2.5 times its budget. So,
at least.
And that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but I mean, great
It does
films.
when Warner Brothers is producing your movie.
Great films. There have been very high quality films that didn't find an audience, but this was meant to be a big budget science fiction film and meant to be successful. This was not an art house movie on a budget of, 1 million or something like that. They spent 70 or 80 million. It only made about 100 or something like that. This is where the critical reception is problematic, maybe because the three of us are independent in the sense that like we're not beholden to some vast publishing empire, or we are not invited. I personally have never been invited to a premiere. Like I was not invited to the premiere of this movie. I don't know anyone in the movie. Mark Ruffalo doesn't invite me over for coffee and
Not anymore, anyways.
pickleball like he does for you, Chris.
He won't after hearing this episode.
Yeah, he definitely is not. He's definitely not taking you off his list anytime soon, Dr. Perlmutter.
He's a good actor. I just felt he was And in any case, let's talk about the villain here, because again, I want to make a case that like 90% of the people on this spaceship, this colony ship, were villains in different kinds. That the lead scientist, like the other 17 scientists, except again for that young woman who showed some sympathy, but having a sympathetic concentration camp doctor who still goes through with all the horrible experiments, that I don't think you win extra points in front of the Nuremberg tribunal for like, well, I felt bad doing that to those people. So this villain here, first of all, just all over the place. I mean, they throw in some white supremacist lines, which I don't think has anything to do with his lust for power. In fact, if he was lusting for power, you'd want to appeal to everybody if he wants to be king of the new planet, especially when you've got a diverse crew. I didn't understand that. Going back to another franchise, The Hunger Games, which I've seen 4 of whatever 20 movies they've made, but there are empires which act stupidly in science fiction and fantasy, where you go like, that empire wouldn't last that long. That kingdom, that tyranny wouldn't last that long in real life. They're not just very clever about being rulers. And you don't understand how his character there bred fanatical loyalty in these people. You don't understand. He says things which, again, if I were his advisor, his PR advisor, I'd go, no, don't say that. It seems like it was so ridiculously broadly drawn a villain that it takes away from villainy, right? I mean, okay, let's talk about a famous movie, the Charlie Chaplin, The Great Dictator, where he was playing a great dictator, and through farce, he wanted to make fun of an evil person who was trying to rule the world at the time he was making the movie. This was wildly ineffective political satire and wildly distracting farce, so that I really just wondered, did they have a conversation and say, Mark, I'm going to cut out some lines of your script here. I'm going to rewrite something here. This just isn't working. And I was thinking about the problem of movies as opposed to plays. In plays, you have a situation where you write a new play and somebody wants to produce it in Lubbock to try it out, right? And you do 50 performances in Lubbock, and the audience is there, and you get a sense of what lines work and what don't work. And then eventually you move to Broadway, I mean, the traditional formula, and you go like, okay, well, at least we've worked out the kinks. And that's what's supposed to happen in movies, in the shooting process, especially with digital now, and in the editing process. And it just feels like they just didn't work out any of the obvious kinks.
And again, I'm not, to the question you pose, I'm not even sure that they are kinks. I think that, if you look at what Bong Joon Ho said about Mark Ruffalo's character, he said it was not based on any specific individual, but, quote, a mix of many different politicians and dictators that we have seen throughout history. It's going to date this film in a way that only something like this can.
I did see Genghis Khan in him. Yes, he's absolutely right.
Right. His God-given name is Chinggis Khan, actually. Get it right, Dr. Perlmutter. Come on. But to your point, like I think it's very juvenile, even in this day and age, to be like, it's not based on any one person. It's like, well, if you have Mark Ruffalo playing this character at this point in time, in this area of the world, localized entirely in this movie, he's going to lean into a specific thing because that's of the time. You're dating this movie and making it something that will be, if it's not successful now, which to your point, Dr. Perlmutter, the movie barely made back its budget. I'd like to ask, why do we keep making these really expensive, effectively art house movies and then being surprised when they flop? Like The Bride? That movie was awful. Really awful. I went and saw it in theaters. I contributed to the $24 million the film made. That film cost $100 million. I went and saw Backrooms 2 weekends ago. That movie cost $10 million and it made like $200 million. I don't understand why we're wasting our time anymore by backing dump trucks full of money up to people and asking them to try and do something interesting with it when it's not the money that's the problem. It's the creativity behind it. This whole like, I'm scared of AI and AI is scaring us and AI is going to take our jobs. You know, AI doesn't really mean, if you don't use AI, it doesn't mean you're going to know how to write a script. Even Bong Joon Ho stumbled and fumbled through this one. And I don't know if he was using AI. Let's say for the sake of argument, he didn't, which I would assume he didn't. This movie's not great. What are we going to chalk that up to? Whose fault is that? Okay, well, it wasn't a very good script. Okay, that has nothing to do with anything other than a not great movie. You can't chalk this movie's failure up to anything exterior to it, or men don't like women, like with something like The Bride, where it's like, it's a female Frankenstein movie. Like, I won't go see that. Like, oh, Jesus. There's none of that even with this movie. This movie just bombed because it's not a great movie. This is not a Blade Runner situation where time will be kind to this film and 10 years from now we'll be having a 4-hour documentary about Mickey 17. No, I think that this will be a movie that maybe 15 years from now, there'll be someone who looks like someone like me, talking like someone like me, who's like, hey, we're talking about this Robert Pattinson film that no one watched 20 years ago. Like, okay, that's probably where this movie stays. Because to your point, Dr. Perlmutter, when the movie has so many ideas that it could have gone with, like, hey, these people are all Nazis. No, they're all just under the Cruciatus curse. Like, that's what the movie ends up going with at the end. It's like, but they're still the good people now. Like, no. Like, we don't get to just whitewash that and ignore it. Like, that's part of this whole theme of the movie is the complete dehumanization of humanity and Mickey 17. I'm sorry. Like, I'm so disappointed by this movie. I almost feel like I have to apologize for the three of us watching it. But then I remembered I didn't make it. So it's technically not my fault. But I will vouch for the fact that Robert Pattinson, I think for the most part, and Bong Joon Ho both have relatively successful enough track records that it's more surprising to me that this movie is not successful than the fact that it's a failure. For me personally, anyways.
Everything that we talked about so far, all of the problems that we've pointed out are in the plot. It's really incredible how that was really the only consistent issue with the movie. Everything else, as we discussed at the beginning, and Dr. Perlmutter pointed out, the cinematography, the music was unimpressive, but technically okay. It certainly wasn't obtrusive. The acting was fantastic within the confines of the script as much as possible. Really, I mean, Toni Collette, she really was struggling at the end, and I don't blame her. I don't even think Meryl Streep could make do with some of the lines that she had in that strange dream sequence. The sound production was very good. I did notice, I don't know if this was just me, but I noticed some moments in the latter half of the movie where a character would be speaking to another character and you're seeing their reaction, and the audio sounds odd. Like, the voice sounds slightly muffled. Did anybody else notice that?
Yeah, it was not just you. I was wondering, like, what were, I don't know if it was like a intentional choice or just a choice. I would say the music in this movie similarly was kind of an odd choice. Didn't you, Miranda, love K-drama music in this sci-fi film? There were some like K-drama takeaways where I was like, what is happening here? Like, who's designing the sound and like the production of the audio for this film? Like, what are we doing here? This is so strange.
I actually appreciated it kind of as a distraction. It's kind of, oh, that's interesting, and I thought less about what was happening in the scene. So
That's valid.
Yeah, I enjoyed the music, and I thought it was an okay choice, especially if they were. I didn't really notice any like K-drama-esque.
It was towards the end. It was like this very like melancholy stuff towards the end where I was like, it was weird because it's a Bong Joon Ho film, but if I were to ask you, Miranda, like, if you watch this movie and I were to ask you, like, who directed this film, would you say is there's anything about it that's distinctly Bong Joon Ho? I don't know. Especially compared to the thing that everybody remembers him for is Parasite, right? And then sometimes people bring up Snowpiercer with a host or Mother, or probably more recently Okja. I don't know, even if you had somebody who was a mega fan
of Bong Joon Ho that they would be able to identify him as the director of this movie. It was just such a departure from everything that I've seen him do before. It's very odd. I thought it was, and I'm wondering if this was entirely his brainchild, and maybe that's why. In ways,
vanity piece type things.
Yes, this is his prequel, Star Wars prequel series. He's George Lucas, and nobody can say no to him because he was so successful in his previous projects.
It is like
And
poetry. It rhymes. It's like poetry. It rhymes. That's what he said. That's what George Lucas said. He said, "I have to. It's like poetry. It rhymes." Don't throw George. I think that those prequel movies are better than this movie. I would say that the prequel movies are somehow better than this movie.
They definitely have a better score.
Yeah, no kidding.
I would say that.
I think when you have someone like Bong Joon Ho, who is, like you said, Miranda, known for Parasite, a film that won Oscars, and it was a foreign language film that won the Best Picture in the United States by a overwhelmingly English-speaking Academy, gave it the Best Picture. In 2019, before the world effectively continued to go further sideways than it has now. And I think Parasite, in a lot of ways, is worth revisiting because I think the film is even more important now than it was when it came out 7 years ago, which is just the worst thing I've said all day. I can't imagine that he will be remembered for this movie as anything other than, like you said, Miranda, maybe a vanity project. This seems a little, Dr. Perlmutter, like Bonfire of the Vanities, as it were. A little, I'm just going to kind of do my own thing and just throw everything into this, because Bonfire of the Vanities, also a vanity project. Toys, Barry Levinson's Toys, also a vanity project. Movies that are just kind of a mess and they meander and unwieldy, I think is a nice way of putting it. And either you vibe with them or you don't. I'm sure that there are people that watch this movie that were like, man, you just don't get it, man. It's so the dehumanization. And it's like, you know what? Okay, cool. I'm not going to yuck your yum. It ain't for me because I love Barry Levinson's Toys. That movie with Robin Williams is completely out of its mind. I love that movie, but that movie is poorly reviewed because it's not a good movie. I'm not going to sit here and say it's a good movie. I like it, but it's a vanity project. Vanity projects tend to be like this: bloated, meandering, with big actors who just want to work with a director. I mean, if someone comes to you and says, hey, I've got the Oscar-winning director of Parasite here and he'd like to work with you, if you're an actor half your salt, would you say, no, I don't want to work with him? No, you say, yeah, I do want to work with him. And that's this movie kind of in a nutshell.
If you're the studio, you're going to say, okay, let's give him $80 million. He'll do a science fiction film based on a best-selling novel. You know, it really brings up this question. I want to go back to income disparity. You brought this up, Chris. I guess this is an audio podcast, so people can't see me shaking my cane here at the clouds in the sky. But it really bothers me how much money is spent on movies that are making a point about income disparity, which could have been made for a much lower amount of money. And a lot of it seems wasted. I mean, how many Hollywood streaming series, movies, has there been this excess on the screen where $80 million, I think, was the budget for this one. But like other movies, $200 million, $250 million. And what do we have to show for it, right? Did it really show us something that was different than Cleopatra in 1963, you know, where they supposedly the most expensive movie ever made. But my gosh, you watch all 3 hours plus of that and you see every dollar on the screen and you go like, okay, well, they needed 6,000 extras and they needed a golden barge because that's what they were trying to achieve. I really think Hollywood sometimes just needs to look into a mirror and say, if we are going to make points, like we should spend the appropriate amount of money to make those points and not the budget of a poor third world nation for healthcare on essentially a waste. And you brought up The Bride, but I think that probably we could name about 50 other movies and a lot of TV shows where, yeah, you could have done that show. You just didn't need to spend $100 million to do it. Plus, of course, the publicity. Now, I want to go back to something just reclaiming, because we've said something really important, I think, which is that there's a line in The Sopranos where the character of Chris Moltisanti has this dream of being a screenwriter. right? And he goes to Hollywood and he's trying to sell this horror film, the slasher horror film, to Ben Kingsley to be the star in it, right? And Ben Kingsley hears him give this just ridiculous pitch, and he says, well, in the end, it's the script, right? And I thought that about summed it up. It's like you can spend money in Hollywood today, and you can have great costume design. In fact, I'm trying to think of the last Hollywood movie I saw that had horrible costume design. And Miranda's right. There were some audio issues in this film, but generally you can find really good people to do your audio. You can find really good people to do the stunts, the dog wrangling. There's a scene with raccoons in the movie. You can find in Hollywood to rent raccoons. We've watched some TV series with movies with great raccoons, but man, no matter what, you can spend $1 billion and just not have a good screenplay. It's the one thing. And I actually feel good about that because I do not think that AI is going to write an excellent screenplay where people are blown away. And the winner for Best Screenplay 2029 is Grok.
Oh God, it ain't gonna be Grok unless you're winning an award, maybe at the KKK Klan Awards, because that's the problem with something like AI is the human input and the human output is not ever going to be any better than what the human can put in. If you can't write a good script, AI is not going to magically make one for you. AI is not going to punch up your script that you failed to write well, because it can only do as well as what you've given it. And if you stink at writing, you stink at writing. And that's, like you said, Dr. Perlmutter, there's no way around that. There's no magical button you can press, like in this movie, to make something happen to become a good writer. And what's crazy is they don't pay the writers enough. They pay everybody else a lot of money, and the writers have to go on strike to get any sort of representation in any capacity. As someone who is friends with several writers, including Richard Haddam, who's been on this show countless times, they don't get paid enough. And yet without them, there's literally nothing. And they would have to go get AI to write the scripts. That's the problem. The people that are worried about the AI stealing their scripts should be the ones going, bring it on. AI can't do that. The people that should be worried about AI doing the scripts are the people who can't do the scripts without the writer. Everybody else should be worried, because there's no amount of good writing that can be replaced by AI. But boy, bad writing and AI are synonymous. And guess what? You don't have to use AI to write poorly. Case in point, this film. Case in point, The Bride. Case in point, frankly, The Mandalorian and Grogu, a film that, like you said, Dr. Perlmutter, cost like $160 million and lost to two bozo Gen Z horror movies that have more to say with like 1/16 of the budget. And I say bozo horror movies because neither one of them 10 years ago would have ever gotten made if not for the fact that the mainstream is now finally looking at places where democratization of videos have existed, like YouTube, and saying, oh, you mean 10 million people on YouTube might actually show up in person to watch the movie based on the thing from YouTube? Yeah, they did. But guess what? If people weren't showing up to watch Mandalorian and Grogu on Disney Plus, guess what they're not going to do? Go see it in the theater. No matter how much money you throw at it. No matter how many times Pedro Pascal goes and eats wings on Hot One. I don't care. You can't create interest in something that people have deemed uninteresting because the writing isn't living up to the expectation. And this movie, I think, like you said, Dr. Perlmutter, it's mighty white of you movie to say, hey, by the way, income inequality, let's spend $100 million on this goofy movie. Like, come on, guys. We're really missing the point here by a mile, but hey, you know what? To be fair, don't cry too hard for the studios. Most of these movies that bomb, they're just a rounding error at the end of the day anyways. So AI is good for adding 2 and 2 together really quickly because 2 + 2 is always 4. But if you need someone to make a decision about a script that's a creative idea, AI can't do that. And I'm confident in that. When people are worried about AI taking their jobs, the people that should be worried about AI taking their jobs are the people who do jobs that AI could do for them in 2 seconds. Because that's what AI is good for, is manually optimizing things that have been done manually before, not making creative decisions. Because if you're outsourcing AI to make creative decisions for you, dear God, I I pray for you, because if you get caught doing it like the Duffer Brothers did with Stranger Things, they'll roast you over a fire until there's nothing left. Even if you didn't use it and it was just open on your screen and somebody caught it in the documentary that they released. Bad screenwriting doesn't, the author of bad screenwriting, AI or not, is always bad. And that's, yeah, like you said, Dr. Perlmutter, it's such a shame, because I had high hopes for this movie, higher hopes than I normally have for a lot of things I sit down to watch. And by the end of it, I was excited to rewatch other Robert Pattinson things that he's much better in, like The Drama, which came out this year and I think cost like $5 to make. I don't even know. They probably paid Zendaya and Robert Pattinson SAG minimum, and that was about it. But it's a much more engaging and interesting film and a much more human story that speaks to the times now than a movie where they spent $1 billion on it and missed the point by not only a mile, but like 4 or 5 miles.
I think it's really interesting how that's also true. This idea that you can spend a bunch of money on something and have it just be absolute garbage because you are either not talented or because you are misinformed and you're not having the people around you, correct decisions you're making. And obviously, streaming platforms like Netflix are really guilty of doing this, just churning out as much as possible so that they have content on their platform, and a lot of it's really cookie cutter and not very interesting. And there's definitely, I mean, it's true in every form of art, in every creative endeavor, in architecture, in music, in movie making, that if you can't make something great with a limited budget and limited resources, then if you can only make great art with unlimited resources, with a large amount of money, a large amount of power and control, but you can't make the same quality media or art or whatever with limited resources, I don't think you're a good artist, because
I agree. I was going to say, like, I agree. And I think it's something that we should normalize. If people are going to have the conversation about AI and you're going to have the idea that like AI is going to take everybody's creative job and it's going to run rampant, let's have the conversation about people being bad at creative things on their own. And let's just have that conversation out in the open, because I hate to break this to some creative types, but you can, like Miranda just said, suck at what you're doing. And I don't have to applaud you just because you made something. Because especially in this day and age where we're spending money on things to buy them or enjoy them, or you're spending time, which is more important than money, on things, we shouldn't just be okay with mediocrity. We shouldn't be okay with the second screen experience, everybody. That is such a lazy existence that we have found ourselves in. I always say I would wish for a dystopia like Mickey 17, because the one that we're in now is so unbelievably boring. All the content's the same. All the stuff on Netflix is the same. And all of the movies are terrible for the most part, other than like a handful of things, because they're all overproduced, overly expensive, kind of unnecessary for the most part. And the things that are good, The Drama, I looked at the budget, is $28 million. And I guarantee you a lot of that is probably just to pay Robert Pattinson and Zendaya's, cost as actors. And that movie is written and directed by the same person, just like this movie is. And it's so much more successful at telling an interesting human story with Robert Pattinson. And it's a third of the budget of this movie. And it's a movie that I think actually has some staying power and has something to say. This movie has none of that. And it's such a shame, because you can't blame AI for this. You can't blame AI for this being a bad movie. All you have to do, and that's the thing, like, I don't know how this conversation progresses anymore in the AI is going to take the creative jobs away sphere, when a bad movie has existed long before AI ever came into the picture. Dr. Perlmutter, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Miranda, this may not be something you're familiar with, but the term Alan Smithy has been around for a long time, so that people could, if they felt like they were no longer in control of the project, back away from it and attribute it to someone else, a fake human being in Hollywood who does not exist but has movies attributed to him. Because people like David Fincher with Alien 3 said, you know what? I can't in good conscience put my name on this thing, so I'm going to take a step back. Alan Smithy directed it. That's not AI that created that. That's been around since time immemorial. Since one person said, I don't like what you're doing, I think what I'm doing is better. That has been a thing that could happen. That has nothing to do with AI. And this movie, like, for me, is just another example, like you said, Dr. Perlmutter, of spending a lot of money on something that doesn't yield anything other than, well, it's an inequality movie, but you spent a lot of money on it and it made no money. Okay. it's weird in this day and age to have that. And this movie came out in 2025. This isn't like, well, this movie came out in 2019 before all the wild stuff's been happening. It's like, no, this movie came out like last year. Sure, it was probably it was in the incubator during the pandemic, I'm sure, but what an out of touch message for this movie to have on top of everything else. I mean, look, a lot of things feel out of touch now. And to speak about it circularly without speaking about it specifically, I will say, as my personal final point on this movie, I don't go to movies to be reminded about how terrible things are out in the real world. I actually go to movies to escape and enjoy myself for an hour and a half to 2.5 hours. I don't go see movies to be reminded that, oh, out in the real world, things are not great and people are doing things that they shouldn't be doing under the auspices of things that we have become accustomed to the point where you can put it in a movie now and everybody goes, oh, that's that thing. It's like, man, why is that a thing that we all have to share now? Like, why is that a shared trauma in media that people can exploit? I don't know, but there's going to be a lot of media from about, let's call it 20 years right now, that's all going to have similar themes to it. And I'm not saying I'm not down with those themes. It's just, if you're going to do it, you've got to be a lot more nuanced than this, because this is about as nuanced as being clocked over the head by Gallagher's sledgehammer really, really hard.
Well, I guess my final point would be that I don't regret seeing this movie. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody ever again, and I would never watch it again. But it's just such a perfect representation of many, many issues that we have with specifically modern Hollywood that I feel it can be a good reference point whenever I bring up these issues in the future, just in conversation. It's just, it does a really good job of exemplifying so much that disgusts me about contemporary movies.
Yeah, I like to think of myself as a historian, and I do urge people to look back at the history of when we've had actual situations on planet Earth. And this was true in Nazi Germany. This was true in Imperial Japan. I said Unit 781, but this actually Unit 731. A lot of people know about that, don't know about that, but they were a unit of the Japanese army that experimented on people with diseases. In fact, a couple of the scenes of Robert Pattinson here just seem to me direct references to that. And I feel you really need to respect that kind of history. It can't just be tossed into a farce and be part of a plot without some historical grounding. And I think that's the lesson too, is that when you're going, if that quote you had from him, the director there, is if I were having a conversation with him and I see a text message from him right now. I've got to go and discuss the film, my notes. But it really is important to respect the history that you're referencing when you're making a movie and to sort of understand its context. And just the way the plot went in this, I would have respected it, and I would have seen the historical allusions as manifest of some really deep, important point if it had been better thought through. And I guess that's my coda for a lot of Hollywood movies, is they just don't feel like somebody or a committee of somebody's, because that a lot of, for 50 years in Hollywood, movies were made by committee. A committee of people sat through it and at least thought through everything. So I'm not telling anybody not to watch this movie. There are a lot of entertaining and interesting, maybe in the theater there were more of those, but ultimately didn't work.
No. Yeah, I'm with y'all. It did not work, and I look forward to the next time the three of us get to talk about something good. Because I think Train to Busan, for me, for even the failures that movie had, the successes are so much stronger than even like the minor success that this movie may have. That movie set such a higher watermark. And I mean, even again, Bong Joon Ho's other work. So I think to your point, both of your points, I would not suggest this to anyone, even someone who's a Robert Pattinson fan. I would not suggest it to them. But what a bummer. So if you want to hear the three of us talking about something that's not this, to allude back to Train to Busan, you can find that episode on the RSS feed for this show, which is over at weirdingwaymedia.com, where this show and all the other shows I work on can be found, other than the one that I do on Patreon, which is a James Bond show that's ending soon because, well, we've run out of James Bond movies and they're not making anymore because now Blofeld owns James Bond in real life. So that's fun. So yeah, So we're covering James Bond, and by the end of July, we'll be done with James Bond, moving on to something else that we will be talking about later in the fall, but it will be on its own RSS feed. But if you want to kick a couple dollars my way, Patreon is still the place to do it. And if you do it later in the year, you'll get access to that new show a month early and ad-free because, hey, got to make money somehow. And if I'm not making money on the ads, I'm making money on you listening to the show. Thank you both so much for joining me. It was fun. I feel like this was a test, maybe. We'll see if you guys both come back because this was not only a long movie, but it was a long, kind of not great movie. So those are the best kind of movies, the long ones that aren't great. Yeah, and as always, we'll catch you on the next episode.